Oh, snap! It's been 2+ years, and guess who is back in action? Well, if you want to call action like a community of less than 30 people, uh, then yeah, that's me. I'm back in it. With a new name. So Many Trolls is gone. We're under the moniker of Book now. Oh, so what are we going to be talking about today? Well, MTGO Academy has started a player run event. I played in the very first one. I think it's called like VVAT Centrum, like the Centrum vitamins or something. I don't know. AJ speaks like 10 languages and he's smart, but he doesn't realize it's alienating and uncomfortable for other people, especially when he looks like a sock puppet. So yeah, this is the deck I played. I was one of the 4 undefeated decks at the end of 4 rounds of Swiss, 3 rounds of Swiss. I can't remember. I think it was 3 rounds of Swiss. I think I went 2-0 in one of them, and I went 2-1 in the other ones. One of the ones I went 2-1 in, I should have gone 2-0. I made a terrible play mistake regarding Caracas and bouncing a Teferi in response to a Mystical Teachings, which got a Kiki Jiki, and the dude had Pestermite in hand and comboed me out. And the guy was on one, and he was dead. Like, there was just nothing he could do. So yeah, I punted that game. And he didn't have enough mana to, like, do the whole rigmarole, and I punted the game. So whatever. I will say, after this long lapse in playing the format, and from having been a part of the Commander phenomenon, which I no longer gladly participate in, I am rusty. I'm shaking the rust off here. I'm not as good as I used to be, but I'm still pretty good. So something that's interesting about the top 4 decks in this little player run event was 3 of them were red deck wins, and my deck was the only one that was not. So I guess today I'll talk to you about like what this deck is all about. I don't have matches to recap, but I'll play a couple games or a game or two and show you how the deck functions, so you get a better feel for it. I do think this is a really good deck. When I was talking about it to a friend of mine, I drove. Holy crap! I forgot to tell you. I don't live in New York City anymore. I live in Indianapolis again. I moved back to Indianapolis, so I'm like 5 miles away from Chris Cool's house, or should I say, parents' house. And so now I will be able to run my fingers through his, flat iron blonde hair. Probably even less than when I lived in New York. So he's a bad friend. Yeah. So enough about crap talking my compatriots. I'm here in Indianapolis. I am dealing with some sort of financial debacle. Our closing of our house has been delayed from Hurricane Sandy. Holy crap, did that whole thing sucked. Good news is my board game is 95% getting published. I will not say the publisher's name because we are in the process of negotiating things still, and we're just running through some final playtests, but it's looking like the game will be published, my game Infamy, and it will be released at Gen Con 2013. So, woohoo! Yeah, this will be fun. You guys probably like it, and I'll have more information about that in the future because I am so not against shameless promotion, self-promotion. So anyway, this deck. So this is, when I first sat down, I wanted to make like a Doran junk deck that played like, I get like these weird things. Like I saw the card Dryad Militant, and I was like, I want to make a deck with Dryad Militant. Like that's the whole deck, just a Dryad Militant. So I started building it, and then Doran, I put Doran in there, and then he contradicted like half the 2/1 creatures, or all the 2/1 creatures rather, making them smaller. And it just felt like the deck had no personality. I started to kind of work in some sort of like a graveyard manipulation package, and it just felt like weak and like it was straddling a couple of different ideas when it should have been focused on one. So I slowly but surely started to cultivate this deck that you see sitting in front of you. And what this deck is about is it's a green-black white deck that it has some reanimation stuff going on. It has a loop combo in it. But mostly the creatures are very castable. I think I have 4 6-cast creatures, 2 7 casts, one of which is Eternal Dragon, and then I have a Woodfall Primus. And other than that, everything is highly castable within the context of the deck, and yeah, it's pretty easy. to get this thing rocking and rolling. The thing I really like about it is how versatile it is. I'm not, delving too deep into the dredge thing. I'm not going, too deep into. It's sort of like skirting a couple different strategies in a very efficient way. I will say that survival of the fittest is most certainly missed, but at the same time, I'm sure survival of the fittest was legal. That would have been like half the field. So I think 27 people played in this, and I'm pretty sure I was fourth because I did have the more 2-1-tastic record than the other guys. I did not play a mono-red matchup during the course of the tournament. I played against Kiki Pestermite. I played against like Elf Big Mana with like and Eldrazi and Karn Liberated and then I played against, I believe the first round was just sort of like a mid-rangey Naya deck. I made a conscious decision to play this card right here, Massacre Worm, and I will say to you that most assuredly it was one of the best cards in my deck and one of the best decisions I made. With a lot of Goblin decks, Weenie decks, things like that, this card is just grotesquely powerful, and it's very, 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 very main deck worthy. In terms of the composite deck list, the only card I changed since the tournament was Greenseeker. I put in Greenseeker over Undying Evil. And why? Even though I have 42 mana, I found that my mana base was my worst enemy. I also found that without survival, the discard outlets, there wasn't enough of them, so this sort of increases that so that I can get like the sneak reanimation in, or I can get my yard worked up for purposes of things like Living Death while pushing my mana in a more stable direction. So let's go ahead and we'll start with, by talking about the mana situation. So here we have Greenseeker, which I just told you. We have a total of 6 basic lands, which, with the next guy, Hermit Druid, you're kind of probably thinking, why the hell would you play that many basic lands if you're trying to do the old sexy dump a bunch of dudes in the yard and then rock the Living Death? Well, the answer to that is simply I have plenty of ways to get basic lands out of my deck to sort of narrow that margin down so that I get a more juicy Hermit Druid activation. I am playing Milliken. Like I said, I feel like mana, especially mana acceleration, like, I hate to sound like a jerk, but other than the game that I punted with Caracas, I felt like well, and there was one game against the Elf deck where the guy like just crapped out like Karn Liberated on like turn 3 or something. I felt like my biggest enemy was my mana base. Like I would have 2 mana in hand, and it was like, oh my god, if I don't draw the 3rd and 4th mana, I am going to lose. And I'm sure that's true of a lot of decks, but whenever I show you this thing when it's curved out, you'll probably get a better understanding. So Milliken is working double time. There's a lot of cards I want to put in the graveyard with this deck, so I felt like opting for the choice to go ahead and put this together with him as another dump outlet was a good idea. So he's like a really he's like the autistic younger uncle. That doesn't even make sense, and I shouldn't make fun of autistic people, especially since that's what my fiance does. Yeah, living in Indiana. Wait, I just made it sound like Indiana is just like only autistic people live here. My fiance got a research job, a very good research job, working in her field out here, and she works with. Was a therapist for autistic children. Sakura Tribuilder, what promote? He's got a mustachio. So this is one of the ways we can get one of those basic lands out. He's good for a bunch of reasons. So you can rock the blocks. You're against control decks, sure, you can get down the early beats and start smashing with this deck. But against the fast decks, he's kind of like a one-time wall that accelerates you to get you out to your more relevant creatures. He's also pretty sexy with things like Pattern of Rebirth. What? Okay, Wall O Roots. Gotta have this guy. I think twice during the match I went turn 2 Wall O Roots, turn 3 Natural Order for something juice-tastic. So, yeah, while he is one of the, there's a couple of guys in here that fall under the We Can't Attack moniker, but he is most certainly good, and there has been an instance in testing where I Pattern of Rebirth and I intentionally drained the counters off of him so he would die to get to what I want. Lotus Cobra, I was talking about this last night with my buddy Nick. Now, I am playing, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fetch lands. That's not a tremendous amount of fetch lands. It is pretty good with things like the Sakura Tribe Elder, Wood Elf, these guys right here. Now, the main reason I like him is because if I get out the Primeval Titan, I can start to do this loopy combo thing that I have going on with Safi, Karmic Guide, and Carrion Feeder, to where I can get mana in play and utilize those triggers with the Lotus Cobra so that it can do things like tutor up the right card or even set and sack all the guys in Living Death. So I like Lotus Cobra. I like Lotus Cobra even as just a bear that can push me 1 mana ahead of what I'm supposed to be. So he's fine in my opinion. So Wood Elf's pretty wimpy. It's another thing kind of like the Sakura Tribe Elder, except it's like actually accelerating me real time. There is quite a number of 2-drops and 3-drops in this deck, so it is within reason that you could play Wood Elf and then follow it with another spell. Dryad, I have boarded him out quite a bit. Now I do keep him in against the green matchups just as a forest walking dude. He gets me my lands, but they come into play tap. But once again, it's another accelerant, and if he dies, whatever. If I bring him back and he pushes me a little further out, that's fine. Slalom Simulacrum. All right, Slalom Simulacrum. Same thing. Now, when we have a high number of ways to cash in on creatures dying, this is a fine little dude to have in your deck, albeit expensive as a 4-drop. But I'm quite okay with him. He works very well with Dieball Content and Birthing Pod and Carrion Feeder, stuff like that. He's a pretty sexy dude. Primeval Titan is one of our 6-drops, and we do have like a decent little non-basic land package over here. Interestingly enough, I am playing Bazaar Baghdad. Now, I feel like Bazaar is really good in a deck that's like blue, black, red, or blue, black, white Reanimator. This thing can throw me off my mana base, where if I draw this in one of my opening hand, my opening hand or my first couple draws where I really want a basic mana, it kind of stinks. Now, I have 2 ways to get around this in the deck. I have Riftstone Portal, which, I've increased the amount of discard opportunities, and also the fact that it could be milled away, so the Bazaar could function as like a Savannah. And I have Urborg, so Urborg can also let me sort of navigate that. I did find that I was Primeval Titaning for, if that is a verb, Primeval Titaning to go get the Bazaar whenever I had a hand that was either full of big dudes and when I had a Living Death, or if I had a handful of land, which on occasion I would get flooded. So it does serve sort of a multi-purpose. I don't know, when you push your mana base to something that is this high, which is 42, which I think is that's probably higher than normal, especially when you have like this whole first column right here of sort of mana-tastic guys. I think that sort of helps combat like the inherent drawback of it being a non-mana producing land. And we have other things like Caracas, Wasteland, Tech Edge, Phyrexian Tower, Stronghold. I found that Stronghold I often wanted to get rid of. We have Bajuka Bog if we're setting up for a Living Death. All right, we're kind of skipping the front here. So let's go ahead and go back. Then we have Eternal Dragon. Now, Eternal Dragon is really just smooth out the mana base. It kind of sits really well in that 2-drop area. And, if I get back a 5/5 flyer on the random, I'm cool with that. And I have brought him back just as a 5/5 flyer. He's pretty good in the if you get into a mid-range battle, or if you get into like a control battle where they're having to counter it and then you're getting it back and playing it and they're countering it, etc. In terms of sort of like other discardy, grave filling, manipulation-y stuff, here are some cards. We have Entomb. Now, often the first game, I often will Entomb the Bloodghast. I have Entomb for Riftstone Portal if my draw is weird, and I have one of these like a lot of these colorless non-basic lands, or if I have, you know, the Bazaar Baghdad, the non-mana producing ones. Entomb is really great for a lot of really obvious reasons. If you have any sort of regrowth sort of stuff, I've entombed for Swords of Plowshares and regrowthed and killed something. There's a lot of versatility with this card in a deck like this. It's great, obviously, when you're setting up for something like Living Death. Carrion Feeder. Now, I was talking about this with my buddy Nick last night, and you know, I forgot all about Viscera Seer, who can, you know, has the sack a creature scry 1, so that you could effectively, with this unrelenting loop, that you can get going with Safi Karmic Guide, and if you throw Revel Arc in the mix, it gets even more ridiculous. I thought about having the Viscera Seer, but my concern is that, you know, we're seeing 3 red decks as being undefeated. So that one point of a, you know, just killing a 1/1 is pretty easy for a red deck, whereas Carrion Feeder in response can make himself gigantic, and he is in himself like sort of like a giant unstoppable creature. Now, he doesn't have trample, he doesn't have flying, I'm not playing Brawn or anything like that in the deck, but I think that that's fine, and I don't think that that's something that I really need to worry about so much. You know, I have 2 1-drops now that I can go get if I sack my Protean Hulk, and I'm fine with that. So, I don't know, maybe Green Seeker should be Viscera Seer, I'm not sure, but only time will tell. I did not have an issue with him being at risk of dying during the tournament. So, Fauna Shaman is a tutor that lets us pitch cards, so that's pretty awesome. She's what we got in the place of Survival of the Fittest, which is, you know, she's not Survival of the Fittest, but she's the only thing that we have. Yeah, that was horribly worded. All right, Lotleth Troll. I like this card a lot. This and Wild Mongrel are 2 other of our other discard outlets. I like that Lotleth Troll gets bigger. I like that Lotleth Troll tramples. I like that Lotleth Troll regenerates. It does a lot of things that I want it to do. So the fact that it's like a little dude that's this efficient that jams in so many different ways with other aspects of the game is really making me pretty happy. Wild Mongrel, you know, still is a pretty good bear. He works with what we need him to work with. He can get around weird terror effects and things like that. In terms of Dredge, I'm not playing Golgari Grave Troll. I'm not playing, like, you know, Grave Shell Scarab or whatever the hell that thing is called. The only Dredge card I am opting to play in this deck is Stinkweed Imp. Interestingly enough, when I was in a match where the first match where I was playing against a guy who was more like mid-rangey, dropping the Stinkweed Imp gave him reservations about attacking me further. The fact that it can dredge 5, it works really great with the Bazaar. I think it's a fine Grave Enabler. I probably could cut this guy altogether. Like I said, I think this deck definitely has some holes in it. But for as cheap as he is, and that he sort of works like in the same capacity that things like Wood Elves and Sakura Tri-Builder, like you throw him out to block once, except he actually can take something with him. And then he can, you know, help fill up your graveyard. So, yeah, I think he's a fine little card for now. I may, in the future, remove him if I continue playing the deck. This card is amazing. Draw Orders. It is exactly what you want. You can get a nice soft lock going with your sideboard with Shriekmaw and Genesis against mid-range decks. Often what I get with this is I get Karmic Guide, and then I put like a giant guy in the yard. You know, Massacre Worm or whatever, something that's going to help me, Thragtusk or Armada Worm or whatever, so that I can get to, I can sneak it out. Now, you know, that sounds like a pretty slow plan of attack, but it works okay. You know, often you're playing this on 3, Karmic Guide on 4. Now we're going over here to, this is like the tutor package, the deck manipulation package. So we have Diabolic Intent. That's a godsend with this deck because we can kill a guy and we can go find a card that we want. And so we're taking its drawback, and its drawback is actually an advantage in a deck like this. There's plenty of creatures that it works great with, things like Bloodghast, Strangleroot Geist, which I probably feels like it's kind of a weird card choice, but it's pretty good. We have these little crapper guys that we don't really care about so much. You know, if we got Pattern Rebirth, we can kill our Academy Rector. We could kill something and sack Safi in response, so it comes back in, and we get its come into play effect again, or enters the battle zone effect. So Eladamri's Call, obviously great in this. We're 39 creatures deep, so that gives us lots of options. Most of our ways around things, most of our utility aspect of our deck is actually in creature form, so this helps quite a bit. I did think about playing Living Wish retroactively. As you can see, 12 of my 15 cards are creatures. It might be worth inclusion. I would not cut it over one of these cards, but I do find that Living Wish often it feels a little slow. Grim Tutor, you know, what am I going to say? I think I made fun of this artwork like 500 times. It's what we got to work with in this. I opted to not play Shred Memory main. I did have it main just in case I needed to blow out someone else's graveyards before a living death, and so that I could go get like Intent or Call or, you know, Animate Dead or Zoom, something like that. But it's turned out that it felt like really lackluster. So I put it in the board just as a solution. I think my sideboard still needs some work, to be completely honest. But I wanted to give you the accurate representation of the deck minus the Greenseeker edition. Birthing Pod is really good. I did a really neat thing where I went Birthing Pod, Solemn Simulacrum to get Thragtusk, untap, sack the Thragtusk to get Massacre Worm, and I killed, I'm not kidding you, 22 Wolfbriar tokens. So the guy was already on 4, so he was going to die as soon as I got the thing down because he had a bunch of elves in play. But this sort of drove home the uber demoralizing victory, which was nice. You know, the fact that it's got Phyrexian mana and you can get it out quicker is great. It gives us a greater access and utility to our deck. It is a card that I side out against faster decks just because I feel like you don't have the luxury of paying the life and you don't have the luxury of time that you can with like a control deck or a, you know, a more mid-rangey sort of like a mid-bandwidth kind of build. Academy Rector really doesn't have a tremendous amount of targets in this deck. I think I have a total of 3. So we have Pattern of Rebirth, we have Recurring Nightmare, and we have Animate Dead. I believe that is it. I did have Sylvan Library, but I found that it just felt really meh. Like, you know, I know that sounds like crazy. When we're like sort of spewing our graveyard into our deck into the graveyard with such volume, you know, granted, you know, hey, that's cool to go Sylvan, I'll get Animate Dead, and then I'll Milliken away the big dude and then get it back. There is an argument to be made for including it, but if you want to take a crack at trying to trim some fat off this deck, I welcome you to it. So most of the time what we're going to do with the Academy Rector is we're going to try to get Pattern of Rebirth, and we're going to try to sack the guy with Pattern of Rebirth to go get the Protean Hulk. Hopefully we have another sack outlet, and then we just combo out right then and there. If you're not aware of how the combo works, it's you have Karmic Guide, then you can get the Karmic Guide to get back, you know, hopefully your sack outlet is this. Otherwise, you have something slow like Recurring Nightmare if you're like Dread Returning or something like that. You know, in the past, I've played Greater Good with a deck like this. I just don't think that I have enough giant guys to make the Greater Good as effective as it used to be, and it's slow and it's a pretty dead draw in a lot of matchups, much like the Birthing Pod feels. So I did sort of trim the fat there. I would like more, you know, maybe a Viscera Seer in the mix over like the Stinkweed Imp would be a worthwhile inclusion in the deck. He just feels like a combo piece that kind of, you know, where Stinkweed Imp feels like he does a couple things versus Viscera Seer does one thing. Now, if you get your combo going with Safi and Karmic Guide, so, you know, the combo is you sack the Safi to the Karmic Guide, sack the Karmic Guide comes back in, you can get either the Safi and you can just completely loop this and make your Carrion Feeder giant, or you can go get the Protean Hulk and just start digging guys out of your deck. Once you get Revel Arc, then Revel Arc's going to be able to get back Karmic Guide and Safi at the same time. So it gets pretty cool. Like, in terms of this combo. It is a little bit non-interactive, but I don't really care because you're getting guys, and they could still Wrath of God or whatever. The thing that is super cool about it though is that you could do it instant speed. At the very worst, you could get a bunch of guys out that have 187 effects and just dominate the board. Things like get Acidic Slime and blow their lands up, etc. Protean Hulk, I just talked about him. Typically, your power swing here is if you sack the Protean Hulk, you're going to go get the Carrion Feeder, and you're going to get the Karmic Guide to go get the Protean Hulk so that you can loop it back. Natural Order, like I said, you've got a bunch of these little weenie green guys. Even Green Seeker sort of increases your odds on being able to do that. Sabogai to sack, rather. I was in some really interesting situations. In my last match, I was trying to figure out who I wanted to go get. I got a Natural Order off on turn 3 with a Wall of Roots, and this was against a deck that was running some like counterspell kind of stuff. And this was not my last match with the Elves. It was the match before. So I was trying to figure out what I should get, what would be the optimal play here, and I was really on the fence. I was like, do I go get a Woodfall Primus or was land to stun his mana growth? Do I go get Armada Worm, because Armada Worm is going to give me 2 guys, so if he has an answer for 1, because he was playing blue-red, so he didn't have just like straight-up counters. He's going to have a bounce spell or something. If I get Woodfall Primus and he bounces it somehow, then I blew up a land. I could go get Primeval Titan, which is going to give me like a trampoline creature, which Armada Worm and Woodfall Primus are as well, but he's more in the castable range, and I was going to be 1 mana off from being able to recast him if he did bounce him. Plus, he could go give me like a Wasteland and a Tech Edge, and I could like blow out a couple other lands if I had to. And then I had Thrune in from the sideboard, and I couldn't decide what the hell I wanted to do. So I ended up going with the Armada Worm, and the Armada Worm, worked very nicely. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning that in the sideboard, I probably would cut this Iona, because I feel like against mono red, you don't really need this. Like, sure, you're going to lock them out completely. But it's like just these 3 stupid guys, and playing Elder Scale Worm is probably enough. Or, maybe I would cut Liliana or something like that, and I would put in Progenitus, however you pronounce it, in the board so that you have like that giant unstoppable combo against slower decks. As it stands, Armada Worm kind of works like Progenitus in that you're getting 10 points of trample damage. Granted, they can die, but and they're prone to targeting, but I can play the Armada Worm. What I was finding when I had the Progenitus combo in the main deck was that it felt like if I ripped the card, I had very few ways to sort of get rid of it. And so it was like a mulligan. The last card would be Green Sun Zenith. Now, I'm not playing the little Arbor land, Dryad land, or whatever, so that you can go for 0 on turn 1 and boost your land, because it's just going to... Listen, 3 of the 4 top decks were mono red, so it's going to die. It's going to get killed. I don't like the idea that my mana base already feels like it's susceptible to just being funky of its own accord without any sort of disruption from an opponent, so I don't want to afford the opportunity for someone to take advantage and capitalize on that and make it even worse for me. So it's just a great tutor. I mean, we have a 1-drop with Green Seeker now, and then we have stuff going all the way up. I used it in the game that I punted. I used this to go get Primeval Titan, which at the time Magus the Moon was out, and it let me get basic land so that I could navigate around the Magus the Moon, which incidentally was funny because the Magus the Moon was screwing the guy who played it more than it was screwing me. So at some point he blocked with it to let it die. Now, what was weird was another mistake I made was the turn that I attacked, where I was pretty confident that he was going to block with it because he was bereft of blue mana, he was stuck on mono red, I should have gotten some utility non-basic lands rather than getting... Like, I should have got a Bizarre Baghdad because I had like 2 lands in my hand. And I should have got like a Wasteland and blew out one of his blue lands. But instead I got the rest of my basic lands out of my deck, which, proved a real big mistake. Now, in terms of like graveyard, recursionary stuff, this is this pile here. So we have Regrowth, Ewit. Most of the time we're hoping a really great combo for the deck is to go Hermit Druid, get a bunch of guys in the yard, play a land, you get Bloodghast, you have 1 more guy in play, you sack those 3 guys to get Ewit, and hopefully you have the mana to play your Living Death. If not, like, you set it up so that you can on the following turn. Animate Dead. I'm not playing Necromancy. I don't want too many enchantment-y forms of reanimation because it just gives my opponents a better margin to screw with my guys by virtue of letting multiple forms of removal, making them prone to multiple forms of removal. So Animate Dead is the only one I'm playing. Other than, well, Recurring Nightmare, but that's not like stacking on a guy. So I'm playing Exhume because it's cheap. I didn't want to have like something like Makeshift Mannequin where it cost a lot to play it. And often I have the ability to get stuff in my yard so quickly that this is like really not, the drawback is not a drawback. Now, I have had situations where the drawback, it was a drawback. Like they had a better guy in their yard and I could not play the spell. But, you know, this deck does have like a sort of resilient ability to weasel its way out of these kind of tough situations. I stand by this decision. I wouldn't play a card like Reanimate because I don't think that you can afford to pay life. What's nice with a card like Reanimate is then you can play things like Bizarre and you can pitch like a big guy and then get it back right then and there. But I think that's probably better for like a blue deck that has like bounce and things like that in it. Recurring Nightmare, well, that's all that's left of Rexer, so we have to make do with this. It works quite well. We have plenty of guys that when they die, sexy stuff happens. We have plenty of ways to get bigger dudes in the yard. We can turn these crappy like Greenseekers and Millikins and Walroots that are about to die and Wood Elves and things like that into some of these like horrific monsters like Massacre Worms and Sun Titans and Thragtusk, etc. I did have the awesome opportunity to go Sun Titan, get back a Recurring Nightmare. I pitched, sack a smaller guy to get Protean Hulk, replay Recurring Nightmare, sack Protean Hulk combo out in one of the matches, which was pretty neat. Dread Return, you gotta have this card. In terms of like the four, you know, like you could play Undead, Unburial Rites, or whatever the hell it's called, the flashback one for white 3. You could play even something like Beacon of Unrest, but I'm not really feeling those in this deck. I really like this small reanimation package. I don't think that the deck is leaning on it as much as, say, like a blue reddish kind of deck would. You know, the real goal is to get it in the yard, sack multiple guys, and then like get like a really sort of profound effect with something like a Living Death. Safi, Eric's daughter, is part of our combo. She works really well with all the 1-870 guys when you have ways to kill them and bring them back. Karmic Guide is part of our combo. It's, you know, it's your Unburial Rites or whatever the hell that card is called. Revelark, we got plenty of guys that fall right within the bandwidth to make this thing powerful, including our combo. It's another effect that when this, you know, we get a positive effect when it dies. We obviously have Living Death, which is like a, you know, the thing is, this deck doesn't really play like a Living Death deck, like other ones that I have played. I don't know if you guys, for those of you who have watched my stuff in the past, I had this blue, black, red Living Death deck that was just like crazy, really good, really aggressive, really fast. So this deck doesn't play like that as well as the deck I was just talking about, because I don't have as many ways to get to the Living Death. I think the Living Death is just there. It kind of counters as a Wrath of God. There was a game that I was losing where against one of the decks where they had like a nice early rush and I couldn't hit my mana, but if I would have hit that 5th mana, I would have been able to Living Death away 8 creatures, getting back one of my own smaller creatures, which was a Centaur healer or something that died. So that would have helped me quite a bit because I would have wiped his board and then given myself a little bit of a life buffer. Sun Titan is a limited but awesome reanimation spell because he's giving us access to lands, he's giving us access to things like the Recurring Nightmare, the Animate Dead, he's giving us access to all kinds of good stuff. I can't really talk about how awesome he is any more than that. I wanted to really trim my removal package down so that it wasn't so heavy in terms of spells. I wanted to have a lot of my removal be in creature form. Now, I think like I cut Path to Exile and I just have swords. And the reason why I did this, even though maybe it feels like having your opponent accelerate mana versus like gaining life, I guess that's an interesting question. I'm not playing things like Aven Mind Sensor in this deck because he really kind of doesn't have a home in this. I just feel like swords, especially against things like if I'm just getting rid of like a blocker or something against a control deck and they have the ability to mana fix, I'd rather give away a life and find a way to shave the life off than give away land, which can solve problems in a whole other way. Putrefy, Maelstrom Pulse, and Vindicator are just super versatile. I cut the Mortify. I really wanted to, like when I first sat down, another card other than this silly Dryad Militant card that really like struck me when I wanted to make this like Doran junk deck was Abrupt Decay. I thought that card was really neat. It was like the card I was kind of the most excited about out of Return to Ravnica, strangely. But it just didn't make the cut. So we have Bone Shredder, and Bone Shredder, while he's a wimp, he kind of does the same thing that the Stinkweed Imp and the Wood Elves and all this stuff. He comes into play, gives us a nice effect. In this case, he's killing something off. The fact that he's a flyer lets us block maybe Baneslayer or whatever the hell people are playing anymore, some sort of giant flying monstrosity. And then we get the added luxury of him being able to kill himself if we don't kill him, so that we can use him again for further use with things like the Recurring Nightmare. Shriek Maw, pretty awesome. I talked about the Gerard's Order Shriek Maw Genesis lock, which is pretty nice. You can do really sexy things like play the Shriek Maw in response, sack Safi, get the Shriek Maw back, kill 2 things, and you have a 3/2 guy with fear. Oh, it's pretty standard fare. Massacre Worm is my secret tech. Now, I don't think he's like necessarily a secret. I just don't think that people realize how good a card like this is in this format where there's tons of goblins and elves and tiny weenie creature decks coming at you from every different direction. So this guy gives you a nice ability to not only sort of, you infest all them away, but you're also killing your opponent, and he has the added effect that every time the creature dies after that, they're taking the damage. So when you're sending your bears in and they're blocking your Bloodghast before you play land to get it back, then they're blocking and trading with it. It's no different than if they would have just taken the damage. So it's pretty sexy stuff. My healing package. Ooh, that sounded weird. My life gain complement in the deck is Healer, Finks, Hierarch, Thragtusk. We have Obstinate Baloth in the board, and we also have this Elder Scale Worm guy to sort of, he's like a bizarre version of worship. Very good. This is a suggestion from Chris Cool. I didn't even know this card existed, so thanks, Chris. And he was totally right. Like, I smashed a couple decks because of this thing. Centaur Healer, a 3/3 for 3 is awesome, and the fact that he's giving us 3 life. I mean, he's really boring, and like I really want to play like another card in place of him, but I think I have to play like things like this so that I can survive against the rush decks. Kitchen Finks does exactly what we want. He has like a little ability to come back to life, and we're going to gain life off of him. Hierarch, same thing. He can kill himself, and he's gaining his life. Thragtusk is a godsend. Man, this card is so awesome. Albeit expensive, he's so good. Getting that 5 life is huge. I'd much rather have him in the deck than have Obstinate Baloth, and the fact that when he dies it gives me another creature he replaces himself is awesome. I don't care that he's only got a 3 toughness. I think he does awesome at what he fills a really awesome role in the deck. So I got quite a bit of enchantment-y artifact removal here. We've got Pride Mage, which kills himself. Anything like that works with Pattern of Rebirth is great. Harmonic Sliver is pretty wimpy, but once again, he does this thing like Bone Shredder and Wood Elves. He's going to blow something up, he's going to die, and then we're going to bring him back for useful effect later. Now, there is an argument to be made that this card could be cut. It was kind of funny because I think I had it in my sideboard and I accidentally left it in the main deck. Somehow I put it in the main deck and then I forgot about it. But I drew him twice throughout the event, and both times I was very happy to have him. He blew stuff up that I wanted to be blown up. I mean, we have Acidic Slime, but Acidic Slime's a little slow. Granted, it can blow up lands, as can Woodfall Primus. Woodfall Primus gives us a nice effect in that he also, when he dies, he can come back. So there was a point where I snuck Woodfall Primus out with Animate Dead, had Carrion Feeder, blew up their 2 land when they were on 3 or 4 land, and they you know, they scooped right afterward. I talked about Armada Worm. Armada Worm is just like a giant dork, trampling dork. But for 6 mana at this cost, for that much power, it's just really hard to turn down. It's a nice little. I count that as a sort of come into play effect. The fact that you have the insurance that you get like this giant dorky creature, and that there's a second one in case they only have removal for one is pretty nice. Restoration Angel. I have so many 187 guys. You know, here's a little slew of them right here. That's not to count things like I have, I have 187 Massacre Worm to neg 4 and wipe the board. Shriek Maw, you know, Bone Shredder. There's so many things. Unfortunately, the Karmic Guide is one of the things you probably would love to target the most with this, and you can't. So it's pretty annoying because, you know, we don't want this thing to loop itself forever. I don't know why they couldn't have just said another creature instead of non-angel, but hey, I guess it was in that dorky angel set, so what are you going to do? You know, like I said, maybe these 2 cards could go. Maybe they're pretty lackluster. The Restoration Angel is a nice little ambush card. I have used it. It gives us an evasion creature. It gives us the ability to play creature at the end of a control player's turn and get down a threat and maybe draw out a counter spell so we can play a better threat or spell. It does a lot of things that we want it to do. You know, you can double ambush where you play it, you know, hike back your awesome blocker who maybe has a 187 cool ability. And so, you know, it's pretty synergistic in this kind of a deck. Now, these are just like 3 dorks, okay? But they work well with the deck. So 3 random dorks are Strangle Rootgeist. So who I use this guy. I actually my last match I Green Sun Zenith for this, smashed. I believe that was turn 3. Turn 4 natural order. And I natural ordered before I attacked so that I could get in more damage, and then I got the Armada Worm, and that was, yeah, I think I screwed up the story that I told earlier. That's what happened. So I like Strangleroot Geist, and that he dies, he comes back for more. I like that he gives me the ability to be aggressive. The double green is a little bit prohibitive, you know, like I talked about, having kind of funky mana draws. But he's not really been unsuccessful thus far. You could cut him. You could argue that you could cut him for something more of the sort of utility route. Maybe if you want to play Visceracy or something like that. Tarmogoyf is going to be giant in this kind of a deck. You're just dumping a ton of stuff in there. You're not playing any travel spells, and you're not playing any planeswalkers, but he does give you quite a bit of muscle, if you will, for such a small price. Bloodghast is incredible in this deck. I mean, I side him out against the aggressive decks because he can't block, but he's so good against control, and he's usually good. He's good against any, if you can start to press the advantage. He works so well with so many of your things like Diabolic Intent, you know, Birthing Pod. There's just like a bunch of ways you can use him for a profitable yield. Dread Return. I really like him quite a bit. Phyrexian Tower, swing, play a land, get him back. So yeah, this is the main deck. In terms of the lands, we'll just kind of graze over this really quickly because this is taking a little bit longer than I wanted it to. So here's like the non-basics that do stuff. So we have Phyrexian Tower, that gives us a sack outlet. We have Volrath Stronghold for recursion. I gotta tell you, I don't really feel like I want this card in the deck. Like, I kept drawing it, and like if it would have been a Plains, even when I didn't need a Plains, I would have been happy. It just felt like it wasn't doing anything. This is the kind of card I think you'd play it because it poses a threat, and then your opponent starts to get worried about what it could do, and they focus on destroying it instead of something else. So that's kind of its inherent value. It does give me some reach, but I feel like I have enough ways to manipulate my creatures and stuff that are dead that I don't really need a card like this. Bazaar Baghdad, we already talked about that. Bajuka Bog, it's, you know, it's our only graveyard removal in the deck. I am trying to minimize the amount of cards that come into play tapped. I'm not playing any of the Ravnica bounce lands. They just really worry me a lot, and the fact that they're so slow. It seems like things like, you know, with someone mitigating it with playing like a Blood Moon effect or Wastelands, Tectonic Edges, blowing all this like land blow up stuff. It just seems like you could potentially lose tempo, and I already don't like having to play these things that come into play tap. So Riftstone Portal, we talked about, you know, this. Hopefully you don't have to play this thing down. and do something weird like Vindicate your own Riftstone portal so you can get green mana. There should be enough ways that you can pitch this thing if you need, but it's quite nice to have this in the graveyard and give you that flexibility. We are playing pain lands, and getting around those things is quite nice. My two man lands are Treetop Village and Stirring Wildwood. They were great. I would say I rode on. They dealt quite a bit of damage, and I rode on their backs to victory a couple times. Caracas is great, obviously. We don't have a lot in the way of legends here. I'm trying to think. We only have one legend here. I think we just have Safi, right? I believe we just have Safi. And we have some stuff in the board like Iona and Tivadar, which that's the big one. Thrun. Yeah, there's more on the board. So yeah, it's good. I talked about how I punted. This thing lets you draw a land. You can read. That gives us some non-basic hate. Here we've got our 5 fetch lands. Then we've just got, we'll run through them real quick. We've got our, our dual land, our shock land, our whatever the hell you call this land. We got our filter land, we've got our pain land. Then we go through here, we've got a couple extra ones because we got Razor Verge Thicket and we have Sungrass Prairie. Not great, but we have to really trim the amount of non-basics we have. And I don't want to play things like Oron Reef and things like that. Pindle Haven doesn't do anything in the deck. I think it pumps like 2, 3, it pumps like 4 guys. Who cares? Then we run all the way through that with each of these land types. And then we've got Reflecting Pool, City of Brass, Urborg. And, I'm not a huge fan of playing Urborg because it often can help your opponent out. But I think in this deck I have to play it because of things like the Bazaar and the fact that some of these lands just do nothing on their own. There's often times where I play it and it is quite useful. And then we just have 3 forests, 2 swamps, and a plains. In terms of the sideboard, for our mono red matchup, we have Forge Tinder, which is it kind of sucks. These guys are all like super tiny. You could throw Iona in as part of this. Iona is probably better against things like elves. Granted, they're going to sneak out some guys with things like Sky Shroud Poacher or other Veriform ways to tutor things if they're on-board tutoring methods for them to get them. But I think Iona is quite good actually against elves. Forge Tender, Firewalker, Tivadar, pretty standard fare. Additional life gain stuff against aggro decks is Obstinate Baloth and Elder Scale Worm. I'm playing these 3 cards in addition to Massacre Worm against Weenie decks, Goblins and Elves primarily, or other junk decks, things like that. I'm very happy with this choice, even playing the stupid Orzhov Pontiff, which does sort of have like a when he dies synergy kind of a situation going on. Elesh Norn and Massacre Worm make it impossible for your opponents playing Weenie decks to really make any ground. And both of them are great because, my friend was like, why don't you just play Infest? And it's like, well, because these guys, Elesh is letting me make my guys bigger and win the game, and then Massacre Worm is dealing damage and helping me win the game, whereas Infest is just killing stuff. Our anti-control package is Shusher, Smiter, Thrun, and Genesis, which you can put Genesis in against the slower decks. And these are sort of like the mixed bag cards. I mean, my thought is Liliana is another. I wanted to have her in the main because she's a discard outlet, and she gives me this Edict power. She's cheap. I think she's pretty good against control decks. I think you could throw her in profitably against control decks where you get down to the point where you have no cards in your hand or you're playing something and they counter it and then you use her ability. They probably don't have the muscle to get through and kill her. And if you can get to her ridiculoid power, that'll be pretty good. Also, the art was made by a guy whose last name was Argyle. So yeah, that's the deck. You dead, son. And let's look at some games next, all right? So stay tuned, and much love to you and your, I want to say Adam's apple here. I don't know why. I'm not able to shut this down.